Hello everybody, welcome to today's episode of Easy SAP ABAP. So, in this video I'm going to show you how to create your first module pool program. So what is a module pool program? A module pool program is going to be a program that doesn't use necessarily a selection screen. It's going to be a little more complex where you have the full detailed screens, flow logic, and you can call multiple screens after a user enters some code or input, and it's just going to be what typically most of your SAP programs are designed like. So if we think about, SD modules, like transaction, let's say VA01, create a sales order. If we look at the create a sales order screen, there is input at the header level, item level, there's tab strips, there's tables, there's all sorts of input fields. Similarly for materials management, if we look at transaction MMO1 or MMO3, MMO2, these are going to be transaction codes that call module pool programs, and this is due in part to the fact that you can't just create a material by entering two fields and saying execute. You have to enter all this different stuff. It has to make sure that it matches, master data that's out there. So that's what module programs are made for. So if we want to create anything more complex than just a selection screen and a ALV report output, then we need to use module pool programs. So let's create one. Let's dive right into it. Let's go to transaction SE80, which if you're creating module pool programs, you should always use SE80. Don't use SE38 because it's going to make your life a little bit more difficult. Actually, a lot more difficult. So now, from this drop down here, we select program. We enter the name. So I'll just say Z, my first module underscore pool. It says it doesn't exist. Let's create it. We'll say, yep, create it. And now, includes may or may not be something that you guys use in your standard selection screen report programs. But with module pool programming, it's going to get really complicated really quick. So what we want to do is anything that we can sort of encapsulate in its own include, be that the top include, or an include for forms, or an include for process before output modules or process after input modules. We want an include for that stuff to break it up and make it so that it's not such just one huge long program. Now in this video I'm not going to do that just because this is going to be our first module pool program. I want to get off to a running start and show you what to do. Normally I'd say create with top include here, and I think I will do a top include just to show you that. Most of the time you're going to create a separate include for process before output modules, process after input modules, and for each screen you might even have a separate include. So we're just going to do a top include for this one. We'll go ahead and click OK. It's going to say what do we want to call it. Generally, my naming convention, I call it the same thing as the program with underscore top after it. And a top include, we're just going to say here that we want to save these program attributes. Save it as a local object because we're not going to transport it. You'd put your package in here if it was Z, company name, or Z module, whatever. So we see now if we double click on Z my first module pool, we get some boilerplate type code here. We see our top include, which includes global data, and like I was mentioning before, you might have a separate include for process before output modules, another include for process after input modules, and yet another include for form routines. And you might have separate form routine, F underscore F01, underscore F02, underscore F03, just to break up your code so it's not so huge and just, 5,000 lines of code in one file per se. So we can actually uncomment one of these if we wanted to. Make sure I'm in change mode. Uncomment one of these. I could double click on this. It's going to ask me, do I want to create this program, this include? So I could do it that way, but we're not going to use any of these. So a module pool program, this is the source code. If I double click on Z my first module pool, that's the same thing as going into SE38 and saying Z underscore my underscore first underscore module underscore, why did I make this so long, pool, go into change, and we see this code here. So that's what this does. If I double click here, I get the source code of Z my first module pool. Includes, I can expand this and I can see the top include. We'll go to it, and it just shows the top include. I can actually go ahead and activate everything here. So we're good to go. So now another thing you might probably want in your module pool program, which is the reason we create them, is a screen. So if we come to our parent object here, Z my first module pool, right click, go to create, we can create anything we need for this program. We can do a GUI status, GUI title, screens, modules, variants even, class, definition, implementation, interfaces, any of that stuff. So the most interesting thing, let's go ahead and do a screen. It's going to say give it a screen number. We can pick any number we want between 0001 and 9999. I think 1000 is reserved for the selection screen that's automatically generated with the program. I do think we can create it with module pool programs, but it's not common practice. So let's just say our screen's going to be called 9000. So short description, I'll just say main screen, and that doesn't really matter. Next in pro, if there's another flow logic screen this should call after this screen's done, we could put it down here. It's just an attribute. It's a normal screen type, and we're not going to worry about any of this stuff here. Next thing is the element list. This is anything that's a part of the screen, any sort of attributes of the screen. Next, our flow logic. So we see flow logic, we have two events here. Process after input and process before output. And that pretty much self-explanatory. Anything that's going to be in this process before output is going to be processed before the screen gets drawn and rendered to the user. So things like GUI titles, which is the title bar, or GUI status, which is which buttons here are enabled or not enabled, and then which buttons here are enabled and not enabled. So let's do an example of this. Let's go ahead and uncomment this module status 9000 and double click it. It's going to say this module doesn't exist, where we want to create it. I'm just going to go ahead and say create it in our regular master program source. Save it. It's going to create conveniently this module for us. It's actually going to have boilerplate here to set as PF status and a title bar. Let's do both of those actually. Let's say that we want a PF status named Z status and a title bar named Z title. Doesn't get much easier than that. Now if we double click on Z status, we'll see it doesn't exist. Do we want to create it? Yes. Go ahead and save. Say Z status, I'll just say main status. And a status is essentially going to be everything that's in the menu bar, the application toolbar, or function keys. So all this stuff is going to be disabled by default. We're not going to have any sort of thing in our status. And let's just do a Z title for a title bar. It's going to say create it. We'll say yes. And this is just going to say the title bar. So we'll say my first test program. Go ahead and click OK. So let's comment this out since we don't have, well, we do have a status. It just doesn't do anything yet. So now we see we have a module to handle our process before output event of our screen that we created 9000. Conveniently named status 9000, which is an output module. Go back to flow logic. We see it's calling that. Now process after input, we'll uncomment this, double click on it, and what process after input is going to do, it's going to handle user commands. So we'll create this again in our master program. This would typically be in a separate include. So now in our user command, which is a process after input event, which means the user has input something, we can go ahead and handle a user command. So we're not going to use syucom that most of you guys are familiar with. A user command is going to be handled by the screen. So if we double click on our screen 9000, go to element list, we see it's already suggesting for us this element of type OK. The naming convention typically is OK code. We'll say OK code. So now in our screen flow logic, at the user command, we can say message OK underscore code type I. So now we're going to display the user command that the user has forced to be output at the screen. If we check it right now, we're going to say field OK code is unknown. So in classical DINPro dynamic programs, which is the screen combined with the flow logic, we need a place to have this OK code be transferred from the screen to a variable. Typically this is done in the top include. It is going to be global data. So we're going to say data, OK, code, type, I'll just do SYUCOM. Now if I check this program and I click on the parent, do check, syntax, field OK code is unknown. Well, that's because our include's not activated. Let's activate our include. And now if I try and check our syntax, we'll see everything's good. I can activate the parent, which will ask me to activate all of the parts of our module pool program. I get objects activated, and now if I were to run this, I'm going to see the master program is not an executable program. So that's another caveat with module pool programs. They have to be run from a transaction. So we can right click on our parent here, click create, go to transaction, and I'll just call this one ZModPool. Module pool transaction. It's going to say what is the start object. I'll say program indentpro, which is a dialog transaction. It's a module pool transaction, which is what we're learning about here today. It's going to ask me for some attributes. The program name is going to be Z my first module pool. And it's going to ask me for the screen number that it should display when it starts, which we define down here is screen 9000. I always make sure I check this attribute. If I'm designing on GUI for Windows and I know it works here, I like to do it. So now I'll do test. We're going to save our transaction code, assign it to a local object because we're not going to transport it, and this is our program. So now we see we got nothing here. I can't even click back, exit, or cancel. The only thing I can do, I'm getting a, this is where I said message SYUCOM. I'm not getting one here from this green check. So what we want to do is now, we can get out of this by going to /n and then a transaction SE80. So now what we want to do is our GUI status, Z status, go into that. We go into application toolbar, there's nothing. Go into function keys. None of these are assigned to a function. And the reason that our back, our cancel and exit was, our back, exit, and cancel was disabled is because there's no function code here. So if I say back, I'll make sure I'm in display and change mode. Let's go to this green arrow back and call it back, exit, cancel, and activate our GUI status. That's another thing, guys. You're going to have to kind of do this separately. Activate each of these pieces. So now we're setting our GUI status, and at user command down here, we can say case OK code, which is global. We've defined that. We can say when, back, or cancel, or exit, leave program, and in case. Typically we'd be processing more than one user command here. Now if we run our module pool, we see these are enabled. And because we have back and we said when, back, or cancel, or exit, leave program, we can actually exit our program. So that's a beauty of module pool programming. It leaves everything up to the end user. You know, if you want to do something special when a user clicks back, maybe prompt, hey, do you really want to leave this transaction with unsaved data? You can do that. Our title bar that we defined again says my first test program. If I run this, we see my first test program right here. So that is the very basics for how to get, you know, to a screen. Our screen we define 9000. We define flow logic. We define the OK code for it, which is the SY-UCOM type thing. The one thing we didn't define is the actual screen layout itself. So the screen layout, if we click layout, we're going to get this graphical screen painter tool pops up. Let's go ahead and make it full screen. We can add any number of fields that we want. We can hover over these and see what they are. So this is a text field, an input-output field, a checkbox, radio button, and there's more complicated stuff down here. What we're going to do in this scenario, we're just going to say we could add a text field. We have to give it a name. I like to say txt. Let's just say name. And then the actual text for it is going to be, let's just say first name. So that's cool. If we double click on it, we can get additional properties that we can modify. click on input output field. We can put it right here beside first name. Click and drag, make it as big as we like. We can say this is called TF for text field name. And you see how it was red there and now it's white. If it's red, it means we're missing some property that we need. If it's white, we're good to go. Everything's filled out like it needs to be. And then I could say maybe a push button. And we'll just call this push button PB display. Text is going to be display user data or something or another. So now we see if it's still red, so there's some issue with it. We double click on it, we can get to the properties. It's expecting a function code. So I can type in here the function code that I want this push button to correspond to, which is display. Hit enter. Everything went white, we're good to go. I can activate this screen. I can actually test it right here. It's just going to ask me where do I want to put it. And we can see our screen, so I can say first name, my name, display user data. Nothing magical happening there because we haven't written logic to handle it, but it's activated now. We can back out. We see our different elements here, TF name. So if we want to actually get the value of TF name, which is our input output text field, we can come down here to our includes and say, let's say some more global data. We'll say TF name. It has to be the same name as the field that we defined in Screen Painter. And then it doesn't have to be necessarily, as long as this converts, it's fine. So we'll just say char 30. It's a character length 30 field. Check it and activate it. And so now, in our process after input module, we can come down here. We can add logic to say when display message, oh, what did I call it? TF name type I. Let's get rid of this where we're just messaging whatever the OK code is. Check this, activate it. Go ahead and activate the entire parent here just to make sure everything's active. Now if we run it, it'll run our test transaction. We can say first name, say my first name is Dustin, and display user data. So now we're getting this where it's showing the actual field value. So that is a very, very brief intro to module pool programming. You might say, well, I didn't enter that full, completely capitalized. If we go back to layout, double click on our field, there's things we can do down here. We can say our display. I'll have to remind myself where this is. Under dictionary, case sensitive, exit out of here, activate it, leave our screen painter, activate our screen, execute our transaction, say Dustin, display user data. So now it's case sensitive. So that is the very, very basics to module pool programming, guys. You're essentially defining a couple of things. You're defining this main driver program that is type M, type module pool. You're defining modules, be they either output or input modules, which output modules are run before the actual screen itself gets displayed. Input modules are run after user inputs something on that screen. We can have multiple screens, multiple process before output, process after input modules. GUI status is a way for us to manipulate the application toolbar, the function keys, which functions are enabled and disabled. GUI title is a way for us to set the title bar, which is right here. Includes, typically you'll have one, like I said, a top include. You may have more includes depending on the amount of screens you got. And for a module pool program, you will always need a transaction code to run that program and tell that transaction code what the first DINPRO, what the first screen number is. So when you run transaction zmod pool, it knows call this program and call this screen. So this screen gets displayed, and that is our first module pool program. So if you guys have any questions, I'm sure you will. I certainly left a lot of open ends here. But feel free to leave a comment saying what you'd like to see more of. And thank you guys so much for watching, and we'll see you in the next video.